They said I abandoned my sick mom. So I exposed the truth about years of control and abuse. So, I'm Melissa. I'm 31 now, and until very recently, I was still living with my parents. Not because I was lazy or incapable of fending for myself, but because they just wouldn't let me go. That sounds dramatic, I know, but it's the truth. My dad, Kevin, and my mom, Linda, always had some excuse ready. Something about the economy, crime rates, my fragile nature, even the way the world had changed since they were young. It was always something. I wasn't freeloading. I've had a full-time job since I was 22. Good job too, nothing glamorous, but it paid well. Enough for me to save if I could have kept most of it. But I never really had the chance. I was expected to give over 85% of my salary every month to family expenses. I put that in quotes because the numbers never really made sense. At first, I didn't question it. I figured that was part of being an adult and contributing at home. But then things started to not add up. Month after month, my paychecks would get funneled into the household budget. Kevin handled the finances, so every payday, I'd write him a check, or he'd transfer the funds directly from my account. He always said it was for utilities, groceries, insurance, taxes. You name it. It was never optional either. He made sure to remind me that this house doesn't run on hopes and dreams. But here's where it gets sketchy. Our expenses didn't match the money coming in. Not even close. I did the math dozens of times. I knew what I made, and I knew roughly what it cost to run the house. Even if we added a buffer, there was about $3,000 a month that just disappeared. And the kicker? That was around the same time my dad started showing up with new electronics every couple of weeks. I'm talking brand new flat-screen TVs, a MacBook Pro, an upgraded surround sound system. He'd never explain where the money came from. Use some of the tax refund, he'd say, or got a deal through a buddy. Linda wasn't much better. Suddenly she had Gucci handbags, a Burberry coat, and designer perfume on her vanity. When I asked about it, she'd just wave her hand and say it was all second-hand stuff she found online. But I saw the boxes. These were brand new. I felt like I was losing my mind. Here I was, working every day, giving them almost everything I earned, while they were treating themselves like they'd won the lottery. Meanwhile, I was using the same cracked phone for 3 years and patching up my work flats with superglue. I wanted to move out for years, but every time I brought it up, they shut it down. Kevin would give me some lecture about how dangerous it was for women to live alone. You think you'll be safe out there? You've never even fixed a leaking faucet. What if someone breaks in? Linda would guilt-trip me about family. So now you want to abandon us after everything we've done for you? And of course there was always the line, just a few more years and we'll all be in a better place financially. At one point, I even looked at apartments in secret. Found a one-bedroom about 20 minutes away, clean, affordable, near my job. I brought it up cautiously one night after dinner, thinking maybe, just maybe, they'd surprise me and support it. Big mistake. Kevin slammed his fork down and went into one of his rants. You think rent is just the number on the listing? What about hidden fees? Repairs? Emergencies? Car trouble? Insurance? You're not ready. You're being stupid. Linda was more passive-aggressive. Wow. I guess family doesn't mean anything anymore. After that, they started treating me differently. More controlling, more dismissive. I wasn't allowed to have guests over. They started going through my mail. My phone would go missing from time to time, and when I confronted them, they acted clueless. But it was Linda's handwriting I found on the back of an envelope with the phone numbers of my bank and HR department scribbled down. Coincidence? I don't think so. I felt trapped. Every time I saved a little, there was suddenly some family emergency that required money. The water heater's busted, we need help. Groceries are tight this month, can you chip in a bit more? Your dad's car needs new tires, and you're the only one with a steady income. And I gave. Over and over. Until giving became automatic. They even tried to make me feel guilty about taking lunch to work. You're not eating the leftovers at home? What, our cooking isn't good enough? Linda asked once. Kevin joked that I was trying to live like a millionaire with a fast food budget. I was bringing salad and sandwiches from home. And then one day, something in me snapped. It was a Tuesday. I got home late after covering a shift for a coworker. I was exhausted, hungry, and ready to crash. I opened the fridge, and half my meal prep for the week was gone. Linda and Kevin had people over, some of Kevin's friends from his bowling league. They'd help themselves. My name was on the containers. They didn't care. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on my bed, my eyes burning, and I realized I was 31, working full-time, paying almost every bill in a house I wasn't allowed to call my own. A house where I had no privacy, no independence, and no respect. So I made a decision. I didn't tell them. I opened a new bank account. Had my paycheck redirected. I found a short-term rental online, a studio apartment over a garage in the next town. I paid the deposit with what little I had in savings and a small cash advance on my credit card. I packed the essentials, clothes, laptop, ID, documents, and waited for the right moment. That moment came the following Sunday. Kevin and Linda had gone out for brunch with friends. I took everything I could carry and left. Just like that. When they found out, they lost it. Dozens of texts, voicemails, emails. Kevin ranted that I stole from the family. Linda said I was being cruel and breaking her heart. I didn't respond. I'm still figuring things out. The new place is tiny and my budget's tight, but it's mine. I lock my door. I eat my food. I don't hand over 85% of my paycheck to anyone. And for the first time in years, I can breathe. After years of feeling like I was suffocating under the control of my parents, I knew I had to start thinking seriously about getting out. The idea had always been there, buried under guilt and fear, but something had shifted in me. Maybe it was the missing food, or the passive-aggressive comments, or just the sheer exhaustion of pretending that my life was normal. Whatever it was, I finally decided I couldn't keep living that way. So I started looking, quietly, carefully, and completely behind their back. I didn't tell a soul. Not coworkers, not friends, and definitely not my parents. I browsed rental listings on my phone in the bathroom with the door locked. I visited places during my lunch breaks, always under the guise of running errands or staying late at work. It became a routine, almost like a second job, but it kept me going. I knew I wasn't going to escape overnight. I had to find something that fit both my needs and the budget I could scrape together, even with how little of my own income one actually got to keep. 8 months. That's how long it took. 8 months of viewing tiny studio apartments, some with moldy ceilings, some next to construction sites, some so small I couldn't even stretch my arms out fully. I started to lose hope around month 5. I wondered if I'd ever find something that wasn't a complete dump or a scam. But then, one Tuesday evening in early spring, I walked into a place that actually felt possible. It was small, yes, but it was clean, had natural light, and the rent was $2,200 a month. It wasn't cheap, but it was doable if I stopped giving my parents most of my paycheck. I didn't hesitate. I signed the lease the next day. I didn't ask anyone for permission. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't breathe a word of it to anyone. I had finally done it. I had a key to a place that was mine. For the first time in my life, I had something that wasn't controlled by my father's approval or my mother's judgment. I started moving things gradually, piece by piece, over the course of a week. I was careful, always keeping the essentials at home so it wouldn't look suspicious. A few outfits here, some kitchen items there. I bought duplicates of toiletries so nothing would appear missing. I even created a spreadsheet to track what I'd moved and what was left. Every trip I made to the new apartment felt like a small victory. I was building my freedom one bag at a time. But then it happened. One afternoon, I came home from work, and I knew something was wrong the second I walked in. The house was quiet, too quiet. My parents' bedroom door was open, which was unusual, and I could hear my mom's voice faintly coming from the living room. I turned the corner, and there she was, Linda, sitting on the couch, holding a piece of paper in her hands. My lease agreement. I froze. She looked up at me with this mixture of shock, betrayal, and rage that made my stomach turn. "What is this?" she asked, waving the paper like it was a court summons. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely think. "You were going to leave?" she said, louder this time. Without saying anything? I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. She had found the contract. I had hidden it under a stack of documents in my desk drawer, behind old tax forms and work memos, but she must have gone through my things. Maybe she was looking for something else, maybe she was just snooping. It didn't matter. She knew. Linda stood up slowly, still holding the lease like it was radioactive. "Do you have any idea what this would do to your father?" she hissed. "After everything we've done for you?" I tried to stay calm, but my voice cracked when I said, "It's my life, Mom." "Wrong move." "Your life," she snapped. "You wouldn't have that life without us. You think you can just walk out and pretend we don't exist? Who do you think has supported you all these years?" I didn't answer. There was no point. Kevin came home an hour later. I didn't know if Linda had called him or if it was just bad timing, but he walked in and immediately knew something was up. She handed him the lease silently, and I watched his face change as he read it. I braced for yelling, but he didn't yell. He looked at me and said, "So this is how you repay us?" I stood there like a statue. Everything I had been working for, planning so carefully, was now crumbling in slow motion right in front of me. After my mom found the lease agreement, everything in the house turned cold. Not just cold, staged. You could feel the shift instantly. My dad stopped speaking to me unless it was to make some passive-aggressive remark about how family loyalty doesn't mean anything these days. My mom, on the other hand, went full theater mode. It started 2 days after the confrontation. I had just gotten home from work, barely said a word to either of them, and was about to head up to my room when Linda called me into the kitchen. Her voice sounded shaky, like she'd been crying. When I stepped into the room, she was sitting at the table with a box of tissues beside her and a half-empty glass of water. Kevin stood nearby, arms crossed, like he was guarding a scene. She looked up at me with red eyes and said, "I went to the doctor this morning. They ran some tests. It's my heart. They're worried." The way she said it, slow, calculated, made my stomach twist. I didn't know what to believe. Of course, I was concerned, but it didn't feel real. Not the concern itself, but the way she was presenting it, like she was waiting for me to react a certain way. "I could need surgery," she added, her voice cracking slightly. "It's dangerous. And you're talking about leaving now?" Before I could respond, Kevin cut in. "She's been holding this in for weeks. She didn't want to tell you, not with all your plans to run away." It hit me right then. This wasn't about her health. It was about guilt, control, manipulation. They were staging this entire scene to make me feel like walking out was an act of betrayal. My mom, who had never once mentioned anything about heart problems, was now suddenly frail and at risk. But I wasn't completely shocked. I had heard something like this before. My older brother Jason is 10 years older than me. We're not exactly close, but we talk once in a while. I called him that night, just needing to hear someone who wasn't caught up in the storm at home. When I told him about Mom's announcement, there was silence on the line for a few seconds, and then he sighed. "She did the same thing when I left," he said quietly. "Back when I told them I was moving across the country for grad school, she pulled the exact same thing. Sudden heart problems. Said she was too stressed, couldn't sleep, that it was making her sick. I almost cancelled the move. I asked him what changed his mind and he just said, I realized it was never about her health. It was about keeping me there. That was when everything clicked. This wasn't new. This wasn't real, not in the medical sense at least. It was a pattern, a performance, and I had walked straight into it. But things didn't stop there. A couple days later, I was at work going through emails when my manager called me into his office. He looked concerned, serious, like he didn't know whether to offer me sympathy or reprimand me. "Melissa," he said, "I got a call this morning from someone named Kevin. He said he was your father." I felt my entire body tense up. "He said your family is going through a crisis, that your mother's very ill. He said he wasn't sure if you'd be able to focus at work or might need some time off." I stared at him, speechless. My dad had called my job. Without telling me. Without asking. He had called my boss and painted a picture that made it sound like I was barely holding it together. I asked if anything had been decided, and my manager said, "No, nothing formal. But if there's anything you need, time, flexibility, we can work something out." I nodded, thanked him, left the office, and went straight to the bathroom to sit in a stall and try to keep my hands from shaking. My father had gone behind my back, inserted himself into my professional life, and made it sound like I was falling apart. That night, I didn't go straight home. I drove around for nearly an hour, trying to calm down, trying to figure out what the next move even looked like. Because now it wasn't just manipulation. It was interference. And I knew they weren't done. After my dad called my job, and my mom started using her so-called heart condition to guilt-trip me, I knew I couldn't keep playing defense. Every time I walked through the front door, it felt like I was stepping into a carefully orchestrated trap. I was being watched constantly. My drawers were checked. My phone wasn't safe. The lease agreement had already been discovered once. I had no privacy, no security, and absolutely no trust left. So I made a decision. I was done waiting for the right moment or trying to reason with people who clearly didn't want to hear me. I wasn't going to announce my move again. I wasn't going to risk another confrontation or sit through more emotional blackmail about Linda's mysterious condition. I was just going to go. I called a friend I trusted, someone who had helped me move a few of my things earlier, back when I still thought I could do this gradually. She agreed to help, no questions asked. We planned everything down to the hour. She would come to the house in the middle of the night. We'd park down the block, keep the lights off, keep the doors quiet. No goodbyes, no scenes, just silence and distance. At exactly 3:40 in the morning we started. I had spent the previous few days secretly boxing up everything that mattered. Clothes, documents, laptop, keepsakes, a few books, and some photos I didn't want to leave behind. I kept them in one corner of the closet, hidden behind a pile of laundry to make it look like a mess no one wanted to touch. When I stepped out of the house that night, I didn't even look back. I didn't want to see if their bedroom lights turned on or if they peeked through the curtains. I didn't want to know. I carried my bags out one at a time, heart pounding with every footstep, like I was doing something wrong, even though I knew I wasn't. By 4:10, everything I needed was in the trunk. We drove off without a word. I didn't cry. I didn't smile either. It just felt quiet, hollow. Like part of me had snapped off and stayed behind, but I wasn't sure if that was grief or relief. I spent the next 2 days settling into my apartment. It was small and still half empty, but it was mine. I didn't tell anyone where I was, and I left my phone on silent. I just needed space to breathe and to sleep without wondering who might be going through my stuff. But of course, it didn't take long for them to retaliate. On the third day, I got a text from an aunt I hadn't spoken to in months. Then a cousin. Then another. All of them asking some version of the same question. Why didn't you tell the family? How could you leave like that? Do you even care about what you've done to your parents? It didn't make sense at first, until my brother Jason called and told me what they had done. My parents had organized a family meeting. That was the word they used, like it was a business problem to solve. They invited everyone, extended family, family friends, even a couple of people I barely knew. According to Jason, they framed the entire situation like I had abandoned them in the middle of a crisis, like I had stormed off without warning and left Linda on the edge of death, Kevin heartbroken, and the whole family thrown into chaos. They didn't mention the years of control. They didn't talk about the money I gave up every month. They didn't say anything about the threats, the manipulation, the way they went behind my back to call my employer. No, instead they painted me as unstable, cold, selfish. Someone who had been brainwashed by outsiders. Someone who thought independence mattered more than family. And apparently it worked. Most of the relatives at that meeting didn't know me well enough to question the story. They believed it. They turned on me. I was flooded with texts and voicemails, most of them dripping in disappointment or outright hostility. Some asked me to come back and apologize. Others called me a disgrace. A few accused me of destroying the family's unity for the sake of a cheap apartment and some pride. I didn't respond to any of it. Because by then, I finally understood, there was never going to be a version of this story where they saw me as anything but the villain. Not unless I gave up everything and moved back into the house, admitted I was wrong, and resumed my role as the obedient daughter whose money and silence they could depend on. And that's not going to happen. After I left the house in the middle of the night and they discovered I was really gone, it didn't take long for the harassment to begin. It started with phone calls. At first, it was just Linda. She called from her number 3 or 4 times in the morning, then again at lunch, and every few hours in the evening. She left voicemails filled with crying, asking me how I could do this to her while she was so sick, begging me to think about what I was doing to the family. Then Kevin joined in. His messages were a lot angrier. He accused me of being selfish, of destroying my mother, of abandoning the people who gave me everything. He told me I was heartless and ungrateful and said I was killing my mother with stress. His words were sharp and rehearsed, like he had already said them to himself 100 times before hitting record. When I didn't answer, they escalated. They started calling back to back, 10, 15, 20 times in a row. Then it was over 30. My phone became unusable. I'd silence it, and 5 seconds later it would light up again. I tried muting it completely, but the vibrations still kept me up at night. I switched it to airplane mode for hours just to have a moment of peace. When I stopped answering their numbers, they used others. My cousin's number, then my aunt, then someone I didn't recognize at all. Each time I picked up, thinking it might be important, it would be one of them, Kevin or Linda, on the line, ready to launch into a new round of blame and guilt. "You're ruining your mother," Linda said in one call. "Do you want her funeral on your conscience?" Kevin told me he hoped I enjoyed being alone because I would never be welcome in the family again. And it didn't stop with calls. I started getting emails, pages of them. Some were long rants from my mom about how I'd broken her heart. Others were threats from my dad about how he could make things harder for me if I didn't come to my senses. They said things like, "We're going to make sure the rest of the family knows exactly what you've done, and you think this ends with you leaving, but it doesn't." Then the letters started. They had my new address. I don't know how they got it, but somehow they did. Maybe someone in the family gave it to them, or maybe Kevin used a contact to pull it up. Either way, envelopes started showing up in my mailbox, handwritten and stuffed with guilt. Letters from my mom describing how she couldn't eat or sleep, how her heart was getting worse every day because of what I had done. Letters from Kevin calling me a disgrace, a traitor, someone who had spat in the face of the people who raised her. Some were typed. Some were scribbled so quickly the words ran together in a mess of angry ink. Some included copies of old photos, me as a child, smiling at birthday parties, hugging my mom in the kitchen. Each one was sent to hurt me, to pull me back. I blocked everything. I changed my number, but I still kept the old one on a silent burner phone, just in case something important came through. The missed calls still came in, dozens every day, all from unknown or masked numbers. I stopped checking voicemail. I created a new email account. I told my landlord that if anyone came asking for me, they were not to share any information or forward anything. I locked down every part of my life that I could. Every day felt like a battle just to have peace. What surprised me most wasn't just how far they were willing to go, it was how long they kept it up. Weeks passed, then months. They would quiet down for a few days and then it would start again. A fresh round of calls. Another email sent to a work account. Another unknown number. Another reminder that even after I had left, they were still trying to reach in and pull me back. But I didn't go back. I kept going. I kept waking up, going to work, paying my own rent, doing my own laundry. And little by little, I started to breathe easier. Even though the noise was still out there, it was starting to fade. They had already taken enough from me. I wasn't going to let them take my silence too. After I blocked every number, every email, and refused to respond to the constant harassment, I thought they'd eventually give up. I was wrong. When they couldn't reach me through calls, texts, emails, or letters, my parents took it a step further. A dangerous step. It was a Saturday morning, around 9:30. I was still in pajamas, drinking coffee in the kitchen of my tiny apartment, trying to enjoy the first quiet moment I'd had in weeks. That's when I heard it. This sharp pounding on the front door. Not a knock, not someone gently trying to get attention, but a full-blown, open-palm assault on the wood like someone was trying to break it down with their hands. I froze, heart in my throat. Then I heard the voices. Kevin shouting my name, demanding I come out immediately. Linda yelling something about chest pain and not being able to breathe. I couldn't believe it. They had come to my apartment. They found where I lived, and they were standing right outside my front door, screaming loud enough that the neighbors upstairs started stomping. I didn't open it. I didn't say a word. I stood back, completely still, listening through the door as they screamed for over an hour. Kevin shouted that I was killing my mother. He kept banging on the door, again and again, yelling about betrayal, about how I owed them a conversation, about how I couldn't hide forever. Linda cried out that she was having a heart attack, begging for help, begging me to show my face, saying that if I didn't open the door now, I would have to live with her death on my conscience. I stood there, shaking, because even though I knew it was a performance, part of me still felt sick hearing it. That was the effect they always had, leaving just enough doubt to make me question myself. Then, I heard the metallic sound of keys or tools scraping the lock. I ran to the peephole and saw Kevin crouched down, doing something with the doorknob. I didn't wait. I picked up my phone and called the police. I explained everything. Who they were, what they were doing, that they didn't live there, that I didn't feel safe. The dispatcher was calm, asked me to stay on the line, and assured me officers were already on the way. Within 10 minutes, 2 police officers showed up. I could hear their voices outside, stern and firm. Kevin immediately turned the story on its head, saying they were just checking on their sick daughter, and had been locked out, while trying to make sure she was still alive. Linda suddenly wasn't having a heart attack anymore. She was just worried, sick, and desperate to talk. The officers weren't buying it. One of them knocked gently and asked if I was okay. I opened the door just a crack, enough to speak through the chain and confirm who I was, and told them everything. How I had left the house, how my parents had been harassing me for weeks, how I had blocked them, and how they had now come here and attempted to force entry. The officer asked if I wanted to press charges. I didn't even know how to answer. All I wanted was for them to leave. The officers told Kevin and Linda to leave the premises immediately. They said if either of them came back to the building, they would be arrested for trespassing. Kevin tried to argue, tried to pull the "we're family" card, but the officers didn't care. They stood their ground and escorted them off the property. I closed the door, locked it, and slid down to the floor, my back against the wall, heart still pounding. I had never felt more afraid, and I had never felt more sure that leaving was the right thing. That was the last time I saw them in person. After the police forced my parents to leave my apartment and told them not to come back, I thought maybe, just maybe, they would finally let go. But instead, they just changed tactics. When they couldn't reach me directly anymore, they turned to the one place they still had an audience: social media. It was a Sunday afternoon when I found out. I hadn't logged into Facebook in a while, but a coworker messaged me a screenshot. There it was, a long, dramatic post written by Linda, complete with photos of our family from 10 or 15 years ago. She called it A Mother's Pain and wrote it as if she were the victim of some cruel abandonment, describing me as a morally broken daughter who had turned her back on the people who loved her most. She said I had been brainwashed by the outside world and accused me of being cold-hearted, of disappearing without explanation, of tearing apart a family for reasons no one could understand. She made herself sound like a martyr, claimed I had left her when she was on the brink of death, painted Kevin as a devastated father watching his only daughter vanish into a life of isolation, and even implied that I might be in some kind of mental crisis. There was no mention of the harassment. No mention of the calls, the threats, the broken lock, or the police. Just this perfectly curated version of events that made me look like a monster. It didn't take long before the comments started rolling in. Aunts, uncles, distant cousins, people I barely even remembered, started tagging me, messaging me, flooding my inbox with paragraph after paragraph about how disappointed they were, how ashamed they felt, how I was ungrateful, selfish, lost. They said things like, "Your mother gave you everything and this is how you repay her. And you used to be such a sweet girl, what happened to you?" A few sent Bible verses. One even said, "One day you'll regret this, when it's too late." I didn't respond to any of it. I sat there reading message after message, watching as people I hadn't heard from in years suddenly decided they had the right to judge my entire life based on a single Facebook post. People who hadn't been around when I was handing over most of my salary, or when I was being screamed at in the middle of the night, or when I called the police because my lock was being forced open. And through all of it, only one person stood by me, Jason. He called me that same evening, his voice low but steady. He told me he saw the post and that it made him sick. He said it reminded him of what happened when he left, except now it was worse because they had the internet to weaponize. He told me I didn't owe anyone a response, that the people who mattered would eventually see through it, and that the rest weren't worth the energy. He was the only one who didn't try to guilt me, didn't try to fix it, didn't try to tell me what to do. He just listened, and that, honestly, meant everything. After the Facebook post and the wave of messages that followed, I thought things had hit rock bottom. I had already blocked every number, every email, and told the police what happened when they showed up at my door. I didn't think there was anything left for them to do. But apparently they weren't finished. It started with a letter. I received a thick envelope at my new apartment, and it wasn't from them. It was from a bank I didn't recognize, addressed to me at my old home address, forwarded through USPS. Inside was a confirmation notice for a loan application. My name, my social security number, even the last 4 digits of an old checking account I hadn't used in years. Someone had applied for a loan in my name, using my old address, and listed Kevin as an emergency contact. I stood there holding the paper, hands shaking. I hadn't applied for anything. I hadn't given anyone permission. And the only people who had access to that level of information were my parents. It wasn't just overbearing anymore. It was illegal. I contacted the bank immediately, told them the application was fraudulent, and requested all activity under my name be flagged. I froze my credit and placed alerts with all 3 bureaus. I called a lawyer. I filed a report. I had to take time off work just to sit on hold with fraud departments and explain over and over again that my own parents were the ones behind it. The idea that they would go this far, to actually try and financially sabotage me, was something I still struggled to wrap my head around. But that wasn't even the worst part. A week later, I was called into HR at my job. My manager was there, along with someone from legal and someone from wellness. They didn't look angry, just confused and concerned. They had received a formal message submitted through the company's contact portal. It was signed by Kevin. In it, he claimed that his daughter, Melissa, was emotionally unstable, had suffered a breakdown, and had run away from home without explanation. He went on to say that I was in no condition to be making decisions without oversight, and suggested that someone at the company keep a close eye on me to ensure I didn't pose a risk to myself or others. He tried to frame it like a concerned father stepping in to protect a troubled daughter. I sat in that office feeling completely exposed. Everything I had built for myself, every ounce of distance I had created between my new life and the one I left behind, suddenly felt flimsy. My job had nothing to do with my family, and now they had dragged it in too. I had to sit there, calmly and professionally, and explain to the people I worked with every day that my parents were trying to destroy me because I had left home without their permission. Thankfully, HR believed me. I had already spoken to them about the previous incident when Kevin had called once before, trying to get information about my schedule. I provided documentation. I showed them the police report. I made it clear that this wasn't a one-time misunderstanding. This was targeted. The company took steps to protect me. They blocked any outside communication directed at me through internal channels. They updated my emergency contact. They even flagged my personnel file for any future attempts to tamper with it. It was one of the first times I felt truly supported through any of this, but the damage still lingered. I had to look over my shoulder walking to my car. I had to double-check locks at night. I had to brace myself every time I opened my email. And it wasn't because of strangers. It was because of the two people who raised me. 3 weeks after I left the house in the middle of the night, 3 weeks after the calls, the emails, the threats, the fake loan application, and the message to my company's HR, I thought things had finally gone quiet. I hadn't heard anything for almost 5 days, and I allowed myself to believe it might really be over. Maybe they were tired. Maybe they had finally run out of ways to reach me. I was wrong. It was a Thursday mid-morning. I was at work, sitting at my desk on the 3rd floor, just finishing up a client email when one of our front desk staff called me. She sounded nervous. She asked if I had family visiting. I said no. That's when she told me that 2 people claiming to be my parents were in the lobby, refusing to leave. I felt my entire body go cold. I asked if they had said anything, and she hesitated before answering. Your mom is crying. Your dad is yelling. I stood up and went to the window that overlooked the main entrance. And there they were. Kevin and Linda. My dad standing rigid with his arms crossed, glaring at the reception desk, and my mother, on her knees, literally, in the middle of the tile floor, hands shaking, sobbing loudly enough that people were stopping to stare. I didn't go downstairs. Security arrived quickly, 2 officers who were already on site. They tried to talk to my parents calmly, but Kevin wasn't having it. He kept shouting that he had the right to speak to me, that this was a family matter, that I had been missing, and they were only there to bring me home. Linda kept repeating my name over and over, clutching her chest like she was about to pass out, telling everyone around her that her daughter had been taken from her by a cruel world. And then Susan showed up, my supervisor. She's sharp, no nonsense, and had been kept in the loop about everything ever since HR got that message from Kevin. She walked into the lobby with her ID badge still swinging from her neck, took one look at the scene, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Do you want me to call the police right now?" Kevin turned to face her, furious. "This is none of your business," he snapped. "She is our daughter. We have a right to see her." Susan didn't flinch. "You've already been warned once," she said, her voice calm but firm. "You're harassing one of my employees. I will have you removed if you don't leave immediately." That's when my father lost it. He pointed toward the stairs and shouted, "She is nothing without us. Nothing." His voice echoed through the lobby. A few people gasped. Someone took out their phone to start recording. Linda, still kneeling, wailed even louder. Security didn't wait. They stepped in and escorted both of them toward the doors. Kevin resisted at first, but eventually went along, still shouting back at Susan, still demanding that I come down and face them. Linda had to be lifted to her feet. She kept looking around the room like she was expecting someone to step in and take their side. No one did. After they were gone, Susan came upstairs to check on me. She asked if I was okay, if I needed to go home, if I wanted to press charges. I didn't even know what to say. I was embarrassed, humiliated, but also strangely calm. Because in that moment I knew I had made the right decision. There was no going back from this. That was the last straw. I filed for a restraining order the next morning. I brought the police report, the emails, the screenshots of the social media posts, and now the witness statement from my workplace. I don't know what will happen next, but I know this. I am not going back. I am not answering another call. I am not walking through that door ever again. After the scene in the lobby of my workplace, I knew I had exhausted every option except the courts. The harassment had gone beyond emotional abuse. There were attempts to sabotage my career, fraud committed in my name, and multiple threats to my safety. This was no longer about difficult parents or a family disagreement. It was targeted, it was dangerous, and it was illegal. So I hired an attorney. I was lucky to find someone experienced with family harassment and stalking cases. From the very first meeting, she took me seriously. I brought her everything. My call logs, screenshots of texts, saved voicemails, printed emails, a copy of the police report from the day they tried to break into my apartment, and even the documentation from the loan application they submitted using my name and social security number. She looked through everything, nodded, and said, "They're going to pretend they're the victims. We're going to show the truth." We filed for a restraining order and began preparing for the hearing. The courtroom was small and quiet, but the tension was unbearable. Kevin and Linda sat across from me, dressed in black, their faces full of rehearsed sorrow. Linda dabbed her eyes with a tissue the entire time. Kevin looked straight ahead, jaw clenched, his arms folded like he was holding himself together through sheer will. They didn't look at me once. When the judge asked for their side, they leaned hard into the victim narrative. Kevin said I had cut off contact with no warning, that I was mentally unwell, and had fallen under bad influences. Linda cried about her heart condition, claimed I had left her during a medical emergency, and said I had been coerced into filing false reports. They talked like they were concerned, loving parents who were just trying to get their daughter back before she made a terrible mistake. Then it was our turn. My lawyer didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue. She just presented the evidence. She submitted copies of every threatening email. She explained how they had fraudulently applied for a loan in my name, including the forwarded paperwork from the bank. She showed the screenshots of the Facebook post, the messages from extended family accusing me of being morally broken, the voicemails where Kevin screamed that I was nothing without them, the security footage from the apartment building showing them pounding on my door, and the documentation from my employer confirming they showed up and caused a scene in the lobby. She even provided statements from co-workers who witnessed it. The courtroom was silent. The judge asked only one question. Is there any part of the petitioner's evidence you dispute? Kevin opened his mouth to speak but then closed it again. The judge issued the restraining order that same day. For the next 6 years, Kevin and Linda are legally prohibited from contacting me directly or indirectly. They cannot call me, write to me, visit my home or workplace, or use any third party to relay a message. They must remain a specific distance away from me at all times. Any violation means immediate arrest. When the judge read the ruling out loud, Linda burst into tears. Kevin stood up so fast his chair nearly fell over, but he didn't say a word. Not to me. Not to the court. They just walked out. That was the last time I saw them. I walked out of that building not feeling triumphant, not even angry, just free. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't waiting for the next blow, the next manipulation, the next guilt trip or threat. I could finally live my life without looking over my shoulder. After the restraining order was granted and things finally seemed to settle down, I made a plan. I had already spent months trying to survive, reacting to every new wave of chaos. I was tired of being on the defensive. I wanted more than just space, I wanted to rebuild everything from scratch. I moved out of state. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, not even my brother. I found a new job with a remote-first company that allowed me to relocate without much paperwork, and I registered under a slightly altered version of my name. I rented a place under a different mailing address using a business mailbox service, and I avoided anything that could be traced through public record. It wasn't about being dramatic. It was about protecting myself from people who had already shown they were willing to violate every boundary I set. For a while, things were quiet. But then it happened again. About 4 months into my new life, I received an envelope in my mailbox with no return address. Inside was a single page, a blurry photo of me, walking out of my apartment building, holding groceries. No note. No signature. Nothing else. I felt sick. A few days later, one of my new co-workers casually mentioned that someone had been calling the company line asking to confirm employment details for me. The person said they were verifying an address for a delivery, but kept pressing for confirmation that I worked there. Thankfully, our admin team didn't give them anything. They flagged it as suspicious and told me immediately. I knew it had to be them. I reached out to Jason, the only person I still trusted, and asked if he had heard anything. That's when he told me the truth. Kevin and Linda had hired a private investigator. They had been asking relatives if anyone had seen or heard from me. They told everyone they were just trying to make sure I was okay, but it was clear what they were really doing. They had spent months searching, and somehow they had gotten close again. That was the moment I knew I had to disappear completely. I filed the paperwork for a legal name change. I chose something neutral, unrelated to any past family names or middle names. I changed my phone number again. I deleted every social media account and wiped every trace of myself from the internet. I removed old resumes, took down every photo I could find, and made sure every email I used was tied to my new identity. I opened new bank accounts, registered under the new name, and rerouted every piece of mail through a secondary address. I updated my driver's license, my lease, and every legal document I could think of. It took months, but I did it. By the end, there was nothing left for them to trace. Melissa no longer existed. I wasn't running anymore. I wasn't hiding either. I was rebuilding with purpose, with a new name, in a place they couldn't touch. And that, finally, is where the story ends. After the name change, after the move, after erasing every digital trace I could find and finally feeling like I could breathe again, I got one last call. It came from a blocked number. I had promised myself not to answer, but something in me hesitated. Maybe I thought it would be a spam call. Maybe I thought it was safe, that it couldn't possibly be them, not anymore. But it was her. Linda's voice came through immediately, already thick with tears. There was no hello, no pause. Just her crying and asking, "Why do you hate us so much?" Over and over. Like that was the only thing that mattered. Like everything I'd lived through, everything they had done, everything they had tried to destroy was erased by her question. I didn't respond. I didn't explain. I didn't scream or cry or say the things I had spent years holding back. I just hung up. Later that night, I sat at my desk and wrote everything I wanted to say. I filled the page with all of it. I told them I was not their property. I was not their insurance policy or emotional crutch or financial lifeline. I told them they lost me because they never saw me as a person. They saw me as something to control. I told them I was done. I told them I would not be coming back. Not ever. I folded the letter in half. I didn't put it in an envelope. I didn't write an address on it. I burned it. The paper turned to ash in a small dish by my window, and I watched every word disappear into smoke. There was nothing left to send. Nothing more to say. Now I have a new life. A new name. Complete silence. And freedom.